Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and mist-dwelling acid spiders. I'm Noah Hook, and as you might have guessed, we're looking at 2007's The Mist. The Mist follows a father and son trapped inside a Maine supermarket when a supposedly dangerous mist rolls in. It doesn't take long for some horrendous creatures to appear, and the father must contend with them and the increasingly tense and fanatical group of survivors inside the store. The Mist was written and directed by Frank Darabont and was adapted from a short story by Stephen King. Frank Darabont doesn't have the longest resume, but you'll have trouble finding something shitty he's worked on. He started off as a writer, creating the screenplays for Dream Warriors, The Blob, and The Fly 2. Oh, and he wrote and directed The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile. The Mist is his most recent feature film, but he was of course also the initial writer, director, and producer for The Walking Dead. The birth of The Mist is pretty straightforward. King was in a supermarket with his son looking at hot dog buns when he imagined a giant reptilian monster flying through the store. And The Mist was born after that. I haven't read the novella, but the movie seems to be a pretty straightforward adaptation, aside from one pretty big part. Either way, it has received the Stephen King seal of approval, and he and Darabont seem to be close as this is his third King adaptation. Darabont's close friend and legendary special effects artist Greg Nicotero was in charge of the creature design and effects in the film. The supermarket and pharmacy sets were built in 6 weeks, headed by production designer Greg Melton. Darabont likes to collaborate with the same actors and actresses in multiple works, so you may notice some familiar Walking Dead faces here. But the entire ensemble cast is great. I have no complaints in the acting department. The cinematography was headed by Ron Schmidt, who primarily works in TV. Darabont worked with him on The Shield and wanted to bring that kind of fast pace of camera work to The Mist. Every scene they filmed had 2 cameras rolling, which were usually moving around. This helped speed up the process and always kept the actors on their toes, as they never knew when their faces would be on camera. Great work by camera operators Billy Gearhart and Richard Cantu. The Mist was shot in 37 days on an $18 million budget. It was the fastest and most hectic that Darabont and many of the cast and crew had ever worked to finish a film. It ended up grossing $25 million in the US and $57 million worldwide. It was met with a lot of shocked but ultimately positive reviews. The Mist still holds up pretty well with a 71 and 65% on Rotten Tomatoes, so there are some people who aren't crazy about it. It's been a while since I last saw The Mist, but I do remember liking it, so why don't we just go ahead and jump in. I hope you all brought enough dog food to block your windows, cause we're watching The Mist. The movie opens in the art studio of David Drayton, played by Thomas Jane. He's currently working on an image of the Gunslinger, amongst other posters created by Drew Struzan, including The Thing. A thunderstorm cuts the power, and the family heads to the basement. Good call, as a tree bursts into the studio not long after. The power is still out by morning, and David plans to head to the store to buy some food, water, you know, power outage stuff. His paintings are ruined, but he and his wife Stephanie are just glad nobody got hurt. And while they look over their smushed boathouse, their son Billy notices some mist on the lake. He goes to talk to his neighbor Brent Norton, played by Andre Brower, as it's his tree that smushed the boathouse. This is just Brent's summer home, and he's usually in New York. It's clear David and Brent aren't fond of each other, but he agrees to trade insurance. He also needs a lift to town, as his car was also smushed by another fallen tree. Billy notices some trucks from a nearby military base, and Brent asks about the Arrowhead Project, a local military base. David says it's all probably normal military stuff, despite a few townies who think evil is afoot on top of their mountain base. But more zooming military trucks raises a bit more concern. David still has no signal and sends Billy off into the store with Brent while he tries a payphone. The payphone is out as well, and the store is packed with people prepping. Inside, we meet a large chunk of our ensemble cast, including cashier and Billy babysitter Sally, store manager Bud, assistant manager Ollie, played by Toby Jones, who is a fucking gem, Mrs. Carmody, played by Marcia Gay Harden, who is not a fucking gem, 3 soldiers from the Arrowhead base, Wayne Morales and Donaldson, Irene Repler, a local school teacher, and Hattie, a real estate agent. An army officer arrives and tells the soldiers their leave is cancelled, and more cops drive by and an emergency siren begins to blare. A bloodied up local named Dan runs inside and screams that there is something in the approaching mist. A few people retreat to their cars, but subsequent screams tell everyone that is a bad idea, as the mist completely blocks their outdoor vision. A tremor rocks the building, and people start hypothesizing what the cause was. Theories range from mill explosions to the biblical end of days, and this mother, played by Melissa McBride, says she has to go home as her 2 young children are unattended. Nobody in the store is willing to help her get home, and she heads out by herself, calling them all cowards. David tends to his crying son, who eventually takes a nap, and Irene introduces David to Amanda Dunphy, another school teacher who is still pretty new in town. David heads to the loading dock to get some furniture pads, and overhears Brent discussing an exit strategy with a small group. Here he notices the generator going haywire and turns it off, shutting down the lights as well. He hears movement outside of the loading dock, and it doesn't sound too friendly. He tries to tell Ollie and these 2 mechanics, Jim and Myron, about the noises he heard, but they think he just got startled in the dark. They fire the generator back up and determine the exhaust vent is plugged from the outside. This bag boy named Norm is super pumped to go outside and fix it, and David demeaningly tries to tell the men none of them can go out there. Jim doesn't take kindly to being told what to do by a scared little painter and threatens to knock his teeth out if he keeps it up. He tries to warn Norm one last time, and they fire up the generator and open the door. They laugh at David until a big ass tentacle lunges in and grabs the bag boy by the leg. David is the only one who grabs Norm as more tentacles make their way inside. Some of the tentacles have prickly suction cups and rip flesh from Norm, and Ollie grabs an emergency axe, but the tentacles pull Norm away before he can use it, and his head bangs against the door. They try to save him, but the tentacles overrun the loading dock, even trying some dog food, and Norm is dragged away into the mist. Ollie starts shutting the gate, but the biggest tentacle is blocking it, so David chops off the tip of it with the axe. David gives Jim a very few deserved punches, and he and Myron head back up front while Ollie kills the generator for good. Ollie says they need to tell everyone what happened to prevent anyone else from leaving, but David fears they won't be believed. They drink brewskis with the mechanics and discuss the issues of out-of-towners like Brent not believing them, and that the entire front of the store is pretty breakable glass. Brent is a well-respected attorney, so his opinion apparently means a lot, so David tries to explain what they saw to him. Brent thinks it's some sort of prank and refuses to look at the evidence in the back. He thinks it's payback for a lawsuit he filed against David last year, and the others just want to see an out-of-towner look foolish. David tries to bring him back, and Brent is more pissed off than ever. He threatens to sue and calls David crazy, but Ollie defends him and calls everyone over. Manager Bud reprimands Ollie, but Ollie tells him to shut the fuck up and listen. David tells the story of what happened at the loading dock, which is of course met with some disbelief. They bring Bud and this big biker dude to the tentacle, which flops around a bit and inconveniently melts down to nothing. Bud is convinced and warns the crowd, and they begin to block off the glass with dog food and tape up the cracks. Crazy-ass Mrs. Carmody is praying in the bathroom, asking God to allow her to preach his word in order to save some of them, despite her believing most of them deserve to swim in the lake of fire. Her one-sided discussion is interrupted by Amanda, who needs to take a leak. She offers friendship to Mrs. Carmody, but she ain't having it.
Today I need a friend like you. I'll just have myself a little squat and shit one out.
Brent is lawyering up against the idea of monsters outside, and Mrs. Carmody begins her warnings of death and promises of salvation. She even has her Bible on hand and begins preaching from it, and she is met with obvious skepticism and is threatened with a kick in the ass from Jim, who has possibly had a few too many Budweisers. But that doesn't stop her from shouting about her Old Testament God demanding blood sacrifices. She gets smacked by Amanda, but she continues to promise more creatures will come and take people in the night. Ollie tells the crowd that Mrs. Carmody is known for being unstable, and David once again tends to the frightened Billy, promising they'll get back to his mom. There isn't a gun in the store, but this beautifully mustached man named Ambrose has one in his truck, but Amanda has one on her. They delegate it to Ollie, as he was some sort of marksman champion back in the days. Hell yeah, Ollie. Norton and his group are trying to exit as he's had enough talk of God and monsters. Big Biker wants to go out as well in order to get Ambrose's shotgun, and he agrees to attach a 300-foot string to his waist so the group will know if something goes wrong. David fails one last time to stop Brent, and Mrs. Carmody tells them they're all going to die. Brent, Big Biker, and 6 others disappear into the mist, and after a while the line goes slack. It picks back up and starts ripping away, nearly pulling the others along with it. The line heads way up into the sky and eventually drops. They quickly pull it back, but all they have is some bloody string and half a biker. That night, Sally and Wayne Jessup are talking about their families, and we learn Wayne is being deployed next month. Turns out they both liked each other in high school and get to kissing. She doesn't want to take it further than that, and Wayne is very much a gentleman about it, and they just sit and talk. Bud is looking out of a peephole when a big-ass bug flies up, attracted to his lantern, and it brought friends. Mrs. Carmody likens them to the end-time locusts and is amazed by their stingers. The bugs, known as scorpion flies, don't seem capable of getting in. Good thing there's a bunch of pterodactyl-looking monsters hunting them. Ollie figures out that they're attracted to the light just as our favorite mechanics start turning on the emergency floodlights they set up earlier. Windows start breaking and scorpion flies start flying in, and Amanda is able to whack one down and smush it. Sally's not so lucky, and the poor girl gets stung right in the neck. They try to light some mops on fire, but are interrupted by a tarot buzzard that gets inside. Badass Ollie chases it with the gun, and another one enters and kills a man by ripping out his neck. They finally light the mop, and David lights the tarot buzzard on fire, and eventually puts it down with the mop handle. This dumbass lights up his mop but trips over the bucket of fuel and lights himself on fire. A scorpion fly lands on the chest of Mrs. Carmody, but it flies away amidst her prayers, which only further validates her self-righteousness. Ollie shoots the other tarot buzzard, and it flees and crosses paths with stupid-ass Billy, who just fucking stands there. Luckily, David swoops in and grabs him, and Ollie kills the beast with a headshot. Meanwhile, Sally's neck has swelled up and she's died from the sting, and they extinguished the on-fire guy. Now this lady is a devout believer in Mrs. Carmody, as she predicted more people would die, and will soon learn she's not the only one. David and Amanda have an oddly intimate conversation over the sleeping Billy, but Ollie calls him over to look at Joe, the burn victim. His brother Bobby is looking over him, and yeah, he's pretty fucking burnt. Joe is in so much pain he asks for the gun in order to end it all, but David is able to talk him out of it for the moment. Nobody was able to talk Hattie out of it though, as Amanda finds her body next to an empty pill bottle. R.I.P. David gathers Ollie, Dan, Bud, and a few others, and they discuss looting the pharmacy to help Joe, and the dangers of staying in this big glass box. They get temporarily distracted moving Hattie's corpse, but now Amanda is in on the evacuation discussion. David is parked close to the store, but she warns that even if they make it to the car, they have no idea how far the mist is spread. But David fears Mrs. Carmody and compares her to Jim Jones. She already has 4 followers, and David expects more people will turn to her the longer they are inside. Dan and Ollie agree, but Amanda argues that those people are good and won't just start sacrificing people because she says so. But David says people without power, help, or a way out will follow whatever fucked up option they think will save them. Dave once again deals with his tiny crybaby son, but also tells Amanda to take care of him if he doesn't make it back. Mrs. Carmody and her followers make a scene when they try to leave, saying their trip will only attract more monsters. She says this trip is nothing more than a manifestation of David's pride, and manages to turn a good chunk of people against the journey. But my queen Irene hits that bitch with a can of peas. Damn, and badass Irene is joining the mission? Hell yeah, Irene. So Ollie, Dan, David, Bobby, Wayne, Jim, Irene, and this guy named Mike head out. They make it to the pharmacy without incident, but with nobody around, it doesn't look like people lasted here long. Irene helps David and Ollie gather meds for Joe, but the rest of the group wanders into a webby area, and those webs got bodies in them. They start to leave, but Jim gets grabbed by that army officer from earlier who isn't looking too good. The officer yells that it's their fault, and he starts squirming around, revealing a bunch of squirming welts. Baby spiders start hatching from his body, and Jim spots an adult one. Ollie shoots the shit out of it, but there's a bunch of them. These bad boys, known as Grey Widowers, shoot corrosive webs which fuck up Bobby's leg. The soldier falls from his post and fucking explodes with baby spiders, and that guy Mike gets shot in the face with acid web. Bye, Mike! A Grey Widower fucks with Irene, but she lights it up with a makeshift torch. The biggest spider blocks the door, but Dan pierces it with a makeshift spear. Bobby is dead, I guess he bled out. They flee back to the store in absolute panic as the spiders have a man feast. Sometime later, David awakes to hear another Carmody sermon, and she is calling for expiation. Oh, and Joe died in the night from his burns, so that trip was really all in vain. Irene heard about David's plan to leave and is in, but after the pharmacy, David doesn't think it's a good idea. But Ollie says he should reconsider as they watch over Carmody's huge congregation, now including Jim. That is concerning enough for David to agree, but he wants to know more about the mist and ask the soldiers what they know, citing that the officers seem to know something. They gather around Wayne, who insists he doesn't know anything, but they can't find the other two soldiers. They go to check the loading dock, but punk-ass Jim notices on their way in. Here they find Donaldson and Morales have hung themselves, and David starts grilling him about the Arrowhead project. But before any information is learned, stupid-ass Jim grabs Wayne and drags him out, proclaiming his guilt. Carmody threatens to cut his tongue out, and he talks of rumors that the project was to peer into alternate dimensions, and a window turned out to be a door and let that world spill into ours. Wayne says he isn't to blame as he was just stationed there and it was the scientists doing, and Carmody compares him to Judas, turning the crowd against him. Citing other examples like the moon landing and stem cells, she says that they have gone against the rule of God and now they are being punished for it. The mob grabs Wayne, beating the shit out of him, and the store's butcher eventually stabs him a bunch of times. Carmody yells to feed him to the beasts, and they carry him to the front and toss him outside. David and his group have no choice but to stand back and watch for their own safety, and Wayne begs to be let back inside. A giant creature cries out and grabs Wayne, and Carmody says they will be safe for tonight, but tomorrow will require another sacrifice. That night, David promises Billy he won't let the monsters get him, and at dawn his group, which now includes Ambrose, Bud, and Myron, plans to escape. But the groceries Ollie stashed are missing, and you can guess who took them. Carmody says it's against God's will for them to leave, and her minions surround the group. She proceeds to blame them for the monsters outside, calling them sinners refusing to follow the will of God. She announces they must be sacrificed, and Jim and the butcher move in. Carmody decides she wants to offer Billy and Amanda first, and her bloodthirsty followers swarm. Ollie finally puts an end to the chaos, shooting Mrs. Carmody once in the gut and again right in the noggin, ending the reign of one of my favorite and least favorite movie villains of all time.
Thank you, Ollie.
Yes, thank you, Ollie. Her minions scatter except this one lady calling them murderers. They unlock the door and flee to David's car, but Myron hurts his ankle and Bud and Ambrose help him. Ollie makes it to the car and opens all of the doors, but he gets snatched by the same creature that killed Wayne, and it promptly rips him in half. A Grey Widower attacks Myron and Bud runs back to the store while Ambrose is surrounded and eaten. This leaves only David, Billy, Amanda, Dan, and Irene. Ollie's gun is on the hood and David grabs it, narrowly avoiding becoming Spider Chow. It eventually crawls away and David starts the car, driving past this store full of lunatics on their way out. Good luck, bud. David heads to his house, but it is overrun with Grey Widowers and Stephanie's corpse is high atop their webs. David realizes she never had a chance with all of the broken windows from the storm. David cries a bit and decides to drive as long as the gas tank will let him, hoping to reach the end of the mist. They drive through lots of wreckage and death and encounter a massive creature as it crosses the highway. They continue driving until the car gives out and things are looking pretty hopeless. They hear creatures roaring in the distance, and in somber, silent agreement, they decide it would be best to end their lives themselves. They only have 4 bullets left, which means someone will have to press on alone. David plans to bear that weight as he looks over his sleeping son. He loads up the gun and Billy wakes up just in time to get blocked right in the face, with Amanda, Irene, and Dan shortly after. David screams with agony and tries to kill himself to no avail. He jumps outside and screams for the creatures to come kill him. He hears a rumble in the distance, but it's not a monster emerging, but a military tank. A whole battalion drives by as the mist clears and a group of survivors, including Melissa McBride, passes. The shocked David looks around as soldiers torch the last remaining creatures, realizing if he'd waited moments, his son and the others would have lived. He collapses to the ground, and the movie ends with David crying out and a pan out to the military and survivors rolling in. And that's The Mist! Bummer of an ending, huh? But I, like Stephen King, absolutely love the ending. It's so rare to find a movie that will end so bleakly, and I can think of very few that top The Mist. The novella simply ended with the group searching for salvation, so this ending must have come as quite a shock to fans. But it doesn't give me the same eye-roll feeling that shock splatter films like a Serbian film and similar titles provide. They aren't killed simply to shock. This entire movie is about human decision-making and our own limited perspectives, and how those limited perspectives create flawed judgment. The Mist is one of the most infuriating horror movies in that way. The characters will make decisions that make you want to tear your hair out, and I don't mean that they were written poorly. These people make bad decisions in the most realistic ways. The characters can be a little archetypal at times in order to provide a wide variety of viewpoints, but I generally think they are all realistic and well written. I have certainly met a few Mrs. Carmody's in my day. The monsters are all pretty cool and unique. I like that little bits of their food chain is explained. Despite how horrifying they are also just hungry animals. The practical stuff still looks great, but there was a touch too much CGI for me, which hasn't aged the best. But generally I think it holds up pretty well. I still think my favorite creature is the tentacled one that kills Norm. Those spiky suction cups are horrifying, and I enjoy that we don't see what the tentacles are attached to. King and Darabont had a simple message that The Mist conveys: we as a species are fundamentally insane. Ollie says it best.
Put more than two of us in a room, we pick sides and start dreaming up reasons to kill one another.
It took less than a few days for these people who have known each other their entire lives to start slaughtering each other because they couldn't look past false hope and this supposed self-preservation. And this message of division has only become more applicable since the movie's release. There are a ton of examples of people using differences to justify opposition in the movie, but the most poignant is definitely Mrs. Carmody using religion. By tapping into their fear, she was able to manipulate the crowd into doing what she wanted, similarly to how Christianity was used as a tool to control the masses for centuries. I also appreciate that The Mist doesn't have some super specific backstory or some stupidly heroic journey to go close the portal. These people are in the dark and they are powerless to stop the situation, and I think that's a much better feeling for the movie. All in all, The Mist is a solid film, both as horror and drama. It's definitely up there as one of my favorite King adaptations. It has a phenomenal ensemble cast, a fast-paced documentary feel, and a wide variety of cool monsters and means of death. I definitely recommend it if you haven't seen it, and sorry if I spoiled the ending. Well, that's about it. I hope you all can find a date for next week's episode, because we're looking at 1980s prom night. Thank you all for joining me, and an extra thank you to my wonderful patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and this has been Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of The Mist. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with my weekly horror reviews. If you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote on future movies and franchises that I cover. Thanks, y'all.